It's just another day on the calendar, another middle-of-the-week breath, stretched thin between what hasn't happened and what you're still hoping might. But what if this week wasn't random? What if there was a whisper woven into your routine, not loud, not obvious, but placed in your path like dew on grass at dawn, quiet, ordinary, and absolutely divine? You didn't imagine it, that nudge, that moment that made you pause, the way your heart tightened when no one else noticed. It mattered, more than you think. God isn't always dramatic. Sometimes he's deliberate, precise, almost imperceptible, until the end of the week arrives and suddenly the pattern reveals itself. You've been moving through the days, carrying questions you couldn't name out loud. And still, somehow, he's been moving too closer than breath, quieter than thought. So here's the gentle truth. This week isn't slipping past you. It's been sacred all along. And before it ends, you'll know it. Not in a loud way, but in the kind of knowing that settles deep and changes how you carry tomorrow. Stay here a little longer. Let stillness meet you where striving used to live. You won't need to force anything. He's already speaking, and you're already hearing more than you realize. Even now, I believe he's confirming something you couldn't yet name until today. Welcome. This week isn't random. It's a message in motion. And it just found you. You're tired of decoding silence, of wondering if that flicker of peace meant anything, or if you just made it up. You've been here before, heart open, hands waiting, soul straining to catch something sacred in the static. You didn't want fireworks, just clarity, just one moment where you knew without second guessing that was God. And maybe that's what wore you out the most. Not the waiting, but the not knowing, the fear of missing it, the ache of wondering if maybe he spoke and you walked right past it. But something's shifting, not because you've done everything right, but because your heart is softer now. Your ears are different. You're not just desperate to hear, you're ready to recognize. And here's what I need you to know. You won't have to guess much longer. By the time this week ends, you'll see the thread you couldn't trace. You'll hear what's been echoing all along. And this time you'll know it was him, not by volume, but by peace, by that quiet resonance that calms the storm inside. So don't pull away. Don't dismiss the gentle signs because they didn't come wrapped in thunder. He's moving differently now, and so are you. If something here is stirring your soul, stay close. This is the space we've created for that, to notice what your spirit already knows. Subscribe to Calm Called now, so you don't miss the next whisper that was meant just for you. We're walking this together slowly, gently, faithfully. You're not guessing anymore. You're beginning to remember. There's a prayer that doesn't sound like a prayer. It slips out in the dark, barely audible. Not poetic, not composed, just desperate. God, please speak to me. Sometimes it comes through tears. Other times, in silence when no one else sees, the way your spirit leans forward, hoping for a hint. You're not asking for a miracle. You're asking to be met, to be seen. You've heard others talk about it, how God whispered, how they just knew. And quietly you wondered, why not me? What am I doing wrong? Why is heaven so quiet when I'm finally listening? But what if silence isn't rejection? What if the ache is part of the answer? What if you're not being ignored? You're being drawn in? Sometimes God lets the ache grow loud enough that it silences every other voice, until only his remains. until you're no longer looking for a sign, you're watching for him. And that changes everything. This isn't the end of your asking. It's the beginning of something deeper, a knowing, a recognition. Not a voice from the clouds, but a word written within. If you've been asking, stay, because what comes next isn't an answer. It's a shift, and once it starts, nothing stays the same. Let's keep going. There's a difference between being forgotten and being prepared. You may feel like nothing's been moving, but that's because God doesn't rush what He's refining. In the silence, something was forming, not around you, within you. He wasn't absent. He was waiting for your soil to soften, for your roots to deepen, for the noise to quiet enough that His whisper wouldn't compete. You thought nothing was happening because you couldn't see it, but the work wasn't meant for your eyes. It was meant for your becoming. Remember this, God doesn't waste a single breath of stillness. Every delay was preparation. Every unanswered prayer was an invitation to trust. Think of a sculptor standing before raw stone. To everyone else, it looks finished. But the artist sees one more layer to shape, one more curve to refine. That's how God sees you, not as incomplete, but as becoming. So if you felt stuck, if the days felt hollow, if your prayers seemed to echo, know this. He wasn't silent. He was precise. He was shaping your hearing, not just your path. Because the moment is near, the one where what you've been sensing finally aligns with what He reveals. And when it comes, when the voice cuts through the fog, you'll be ready. Not just to hear, but to receive. And that's a different kind of knowing, one that doesn't waver when circumstances shift. Even now, He's still preparing, not because you're behind, but because He loves you too much to speak before your spirit can carry the weight of what's coming. Rest in that. He hasn't been quiet. He's been calibrating the moment, and you're almost there. 1. 4. It's easy to say we want answers. But what if God delays clarity not to confuse us, but to protect us? There's a kind of love that withholds, not out of cruelty, but care, not as punishment, but mercy. Because sometimes, the truth is, we weren't ready to hear it, not because we couldn't understand it, but because we weren't prepared to follow it. Obedience isn't passive. It costs something. It rewrites routines, redirects relationships, reorders everything you thought was fixed. So God waits, not in frustration, but in deep fatherly patience. He knows when the soil of your heart is finally tender enough to receive not just words, but direction. Think of Jonah. God didn't change the mission. He waited for Jonah's readiness. And when Jonah turned, the same word came again, not as a threat, but as a second chance. Maybe that's where you are, not behind, just arriving, not disqualified, just finally willing. The delay wasn't rejection. It was God waiting for you to see the assignment as sacred, not scary, to treat His whisper not as suggestion, but as calling. And now that your posture has changed, so will His voice, not louder, just clearer, because your soul is ready to respond. There's no shame in the waiting, no guilt in the learning, only a God who knows the exact moment your yes becomes real. He speaks when you're ready to obey, and when you are, the next step becomes undeniable. Even now, you can feel it, can't you? Not pressure, but alignment. Not fear, but readiness. You're not waiting anymore. You're listening with open hands. And heaven is moving toward you because it sees your yes. Get ready. The clarity won't wait much longer. There's a moment when what you've sensed in your spirit begins to take shape in your life. A moment when the invisible starts whispering through the visible. And though it may not come wrapped in thunder or wrapped in fire, you'll know, because something inside will settle. This is the turning point, not because God finally started speaking, but because you're finally ready to recognize what He's been echoing all along. There's a confirmation coming, and it won't look like a grand miracle. It will come through alignment, through a word someone speaks without knowing why, through a door that opens without striving, through a peace that doesn't make sense but refuses to leave. You'll feel it in your body before your mind can explain it. Not anxiety, not adrenaline, but a holy stillness, like stepping into a room where you were expected. God doesn't confirm through chaos. He confirms through congruence, a pattern of peace, an internal nod, a sense that the path is no longer being forced, it's unfolding. You may have been second-guessing yourself for months, maybe even years, but now even the air feels different. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You've been led here, not to the end of a road, but the beginning of obedience. The moment where discernment becomes direction, where the vague becomes vivid. This is the hour of confirmation, and the only thing you need to do is stay present. Keep your ears soft, your heart unclenched, your yes available. Because soon, maybe even before this week ends, the moment will meet you, and when it does, it won't feel like a surprise. It'll feel like home. Watch closely. What's coming isn't random. It's your whisper, finally answered. Clarity is beautiful, but clarity comes with cost. Because once you know what God is saying, you can't pretend you didn't hear. And so the question becomes less about what's being revealed, and more about how you'll respond. Are you willing to do what He says? It's easy to want direction until it asks you to leave comfort behind, to take a step without proof, to forgive without an apology, to move before the money's secured, to speak when your voice is shaking. Obedience rarely feels convenient, but it's always where transformation begins. And here's the holy irony. God doesn't demand your perfection. He invites your participation, not because He needs it, but because it's how you're shaped, how faith becomes flesh, how theory becomes encounter. There are moments when His whisper becomes an instruction, gentle but clear, not harsh but holy. And when that comes, there's no shortcut around the question, only a posture of surrender. Will you trust Him enough to obey, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed? 6. That's where real intimacy begins, not in knowing everything, but in doing the next thing. For some, the yes looks like leaving. For others, it's staying. For you, maybe it's a phone call, or a journal entry, or a confession. Maybe it's not loud at all, just a soft opening where fear used to live. Whatever it is, it matters, and heaven is listening, not just to your prayers, but to your posture. Because obedience isn't about performance, it's about alignment. And when you're aligned, even the smallest yes can move mountains. So pause, breathe, ask again, not what should I do, but am I willing to do it, if He says it? If the answer is yes, even a trembling one, you're ready, and the next word will find you. Sometimes it feels like you drifted too far, like you missed it, like the signal was lost, and you're too far gone to get back. But here's the truth, and it might take a moment to believe it. You were never disconnected. There's a rhythm that belongs to heaven, and your soul knows it. Even in the noise, even when the days blur, even when you haven't prayed in weeks, or you whispered things you regret. He never left, and neither did the path. It's still beneath your feet, even when you can't feel it. Because grace doesn't evaporate, it waits. Think of a river. Even when you step out of the current, the river keeps flowing. And the moment you return, it doesn't start over, it simply receives you. That's how God moves. That's how this week is moving. Not as a punishment for wandering, but as a gentle rhythm pulling you back into divine alignment. You haven't missed your moment. You haven't broken the plan. You are not disqualified. You're being realigned, and heaven knows exactly where to find you. Sometimes we confuse silence for separation, but silence is often the sound of God waiting for us to breathe again, to lean back in, to rejoin the rhythm we were made for. And it starts now, not with a loud return, but with a quiet yes, not with certainty, but with stillness. Even now, you're being drawn, not by pressure, but by peace. So let go of the guilt, the distance, the fear that says, too late. This isn't a restart, it's a return. And the rhythm, it never stopped playing. You just stopped listening. But even now, it's still yours, and it's calling you back. Some answers don't arrive with light. They come in the dark, when clarity is still a few steps away, and all you have is a whisper. Faith, in its truest form, isn't the reward of certainty. It's the decision to keep walking. Without it, there's a moment between the hearing and the happening, and in that gap, God invites trust, not as blind belief, but as sacred agreement. I will still walk, even before I feel. It's not easy. The dark makes everything louder. Fear sounds like logic. Doubt wears the voice of reason, and silence feels like rejection. But here's what's holy. You haven't stopped. You're still here, still listening, still leaning in. Even when the feeling left, your faith stayed. And that matters more than you know. God sees the courage it takes to keep moving without confirmation, to keep believing when your emotions try to renegotiate the promise, to stay soft when disappointment tries to harden you. This is trust. This is worship. This is spiritual maturity, not shouting declarations, but whispering, I trust you, when everything feels quiet. Think of Abraham. He left everything without knowing where he was going. He didn't wait for the sun to rise. He walked under stars he couldn't count. That's the kind of trust that moves heaven. Not performance, but presence. Not perfection, but persistence. So if it's still dark, don't panic. You're not behind. You're not lost. You're simply in the space between the word and the witness. And even here, especially here, God is watching your trust unfold like a lamp in the night. Keep walking. Faith is the bridge. Feeling will follow. Sometimes what we call new revelation is actually a holy reminder. God isn't always speaking something different. Sometimes He's just repeating what you've forgotten. You already know, not in your head but in your spirit. There's a message that's been echoing for years, woven through dreams, delayed answers, and silent moments. It's that same phrase that kept rising in prayer, the recurring theme in every sermon, the feeling that won't let go. And now this week it's resurfacing, not because you missed it, but because you're finally ready to receive it. Sometimes it takes a few seasons for truth to land fully, not because God is unclear, but because your heart needed time to expand enough to carry it. Think of a seed. It doesn't grow because it's been replanted over and over. It grows because it stays where it was planted and waits. You've heard this word before, but now it's finding fresh soil. Now, it's not just truth, it's timing. Now, it's not just instruction, it's invitation. And it may not make logical sense. You might not have all the pieces, but you recognize the rhythm. You've heard this melody before, and it's time to respond differently. Because he's not telling you something new. He's telling you something eternal. Again, until you become it. Until it moves from concept to calling, from theory to embodiment. So pause. What has he already said that you keep waiting to hear again? What assignment keeps finding its way back into your spirit? What truth keeps tapping at the door, waiting to be welcomed in? This isn't repetition out of delay. This is rhythm out of mercy, because he knows how to speak in layers, and he knows when your soul is finally open. You already know. You just needed to remember, and now you do. Now you see it, don't you? The thread, the reason, the rhythm. All those moments you thought were detours, they were directions. Every delay, every silence, every unanswered prayer, it wasn't wasted, it was woven. Because this wasn't just about hearing God, it was about learning to recognize him, not just in the miraculous, but in the mundane, not just in loud answers, but in long waits. You didn't miss the message, you became it. This week wasn't random. This ache wasn't aimless. This whisper wasn't accidental. It was timed, strategically, tenderly, with just enough silence to soften your defenses and just enough light to lead you through. God could have spoken sooner, but he didn't, not because he was far, but because he was faithful to let you arrive here with depth, with openness, with the kind of posture that doesn't rush away when he finally speaks. Now, everything feels different, not because the world changed, but because you did. You're not grasping anymore, you're receiving, not straining to hear, but resting in what's already been spoken. And here, in this still place, the synthesis unfolds. The delays were not a pause. They were the preparation. They didn't distract from the message. They were the message. Even silence had something to say. So let this truth settle deep. He was speaking the whole time, and now you understand why he waited. This is holy ground. The week is almost over, but the word has only begun. So here we are. Not at the end of a video, but at the beginning of a new way of listening. Because something shifted, hasn't it? The way you sit with silence, the way you sense peace, not as the absence of noise, but as the presence of God. You're not asking for signs the same way. You're not begging to be noticed. You've seen it now. This week wasn't random. It was a message in motion, and you were never walking alone. He's been speaking all along. You're just finally still enough to hear. So let's pray, not to close this moment, but to stay in it, to mark it, to breathe into it, gently. Lord, you didn't shout, and still I hear you. You didn't rush, and still you came right on time. Thank you for the ache that taught me how to wait. Thank you for the silence that trained my ears to listen deeper. Thank you for the delays. They protected me from running before I was ready. Even now, I surrender the parts of me still straining to control. I release the panic that says, "You're late." I choose trust, not because I feel certain, but because I know you're near. Speak again, Lord, not louder, just clearer. Not faster, just closer. And I promise, this time, I'll stay long enough to recognize your voice. Amen. If this whisper has met you today, stay close. Let's keep walking together slowly, gently, faithfully. Subscribe to Calm Called now, so when the next word comes, you'll be ready to receive it. We're not chasing clarity anymore. We're cultivating presence. You don't need to strain. You don't need to earn. You just need to remain. He's still speaking. And now, you're listening differently.